Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Aaron Jackson with the Insight Group, and thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to be looking at how to protect your organisation from digital and social risks in 2018. As the new year quickly approaches, we think about our strategy for the year ahead, and it's vital that we are aware of and prepared for the latest digital and social media threats facing our organisations. What are the latest threats? Do you have a plan? Do you know the right people to coordinate with in the event of an incident? Today we'll hopefully answer all these questions and more, and I'm really pleased to be joined by two leading experts, both with impressive bios. Firstly, Dan Nadir. Dan is currently Vice President of Product Management for Proofpoint, Digital Risk and Compliance, and before his time at Proofpoint, he led the product management for Symantec's small business software line. He was also the Senior Director of Product Management for Norton's core consumer solution, and before that he held a number of executive positions at divisions of Cisco, Microsoft and IBM, so it's great to have Dan involved. Also joining us is Jen McClure. Jen is one of the original authorities on digital and social media, and she's actually one of the co-founders of the Society for New Communications Research. That's a think tank that focuses on these technologies, which has since merged with the Conference Board, where she still serves as a Program Director and Advisory Board Chair. Jen previously held the position of Vice President of Digital and Social Media at Thomson Reuters, and even founded the company's Digital Center of Excellence. Jen is now the CEO of JEM Consulting in Silicon Valley, where she helps organizations with their digital transformation and getting a competitive edge on social media. Now, before we get started with today's discussion, I just want to remind you that we are recording the webinar, and we will aim to send out the audio recordings within the next week or so. The webinar is also very much interactive. There's lots of you signed up for today, and we want to make sure you're involved. So there'll be a number of anonymous polls taking place throughout, so we can tailor the discussion to your needs. There will also be time for your questions, so please do type your own questions into the chat box, and I'll be sure to incorporate these into the discussion. So once again, that's the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please do let us know your thoughts as the webinar goes on, and any questions that you may have, we'll be sure to use those. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jen to kickstart today's webinar. Thanks for joining us, Jen. Jen, are you there? Jen, I think you may be muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Jen. Great to have you joining us.
Okay.
Coming through loud and clear. And, yeah, looking forward to your presentation.
Sorry about that. I was still muted. So you're correct, Aaron, as we wrap up 2017 and look forward to 2018, we're really happy to be here to talk about the changing digital risk landscape. We're going to be paying particular attention to social media as it becomes an important part of what we need to think about when we think about managing digital risk. So we're going to be talking about the top threats to watch out for in 2018, how to prepare your organization, how to avoid a social media hack, which is the best way to address one is to avoid one in the first place, and some of the best practices as well as the tools and technologies that can protect your social media channels and help you to improve your overall digital and social media risk management. And we want to have a lot of time for questions, so as folks have questions both during the webinar, please use your chat box, and then also we're going to leave time at the end for questions as well. So let's start by talking about the changing digital and social media risk landscape. Earlier this year, my firm, JEM Consulting, in partnership with Proofpoint, did the first State of Digital Risk survey, and we surveyed more than 200 companies. Most of them were US-based. We did have some representation from North America, South America, and Europe, and they were of all sizes, all industries, and we asked, what are the biggest challenges that you face with regard to your digital risk management? And obviously folks could choose more than one, and we had more than a dozen things identified. Everything from not just internally owned network infrastructure concerns, which are the traditional things that IT security pays attention to, and increasingly email, of course, which IT pays a lot of attention to securing, but also threats coming from the outside. So cloud-based applications, brand fraud, phishing, digital trolls, bots, and then down the list, social media. So while social media didn't rank in the top few, when we dug into that and asked about their specific concerns about social media, the majority of our respondents had several. And they ranged from brand reputation to the security not only of branded channels but also employees' social media channels, particularly as we're seeing a lot of organizations ramp up large employee advocacy programs. Some companies having literally tens of thousands of employees using their own social media accounts to amplify brand messaging. They also are concerned with social media management systems integrating with other systems like CRM or the intranet, as well as internal threats like FTC regulatory compliance, or in the case of healthcare organizations, HIPAA compliance. So as more and more employees are using social media, how to ensure that those employees are staying compliant. And then we also asked organizations, given all these new threats that they face, how would they rate their organization's maturity level as it relates to their management of those threats? And only not even 10% felt like they were optimized in their management of all of that new digital risk landscape. The largest number felt like they had things pretty well under control, managed, but that was only 30%. And then a huge portion really were just at the initial stage. They're only now developing a comprehensive program, but it's still managed through silos. And that is a big concern, and we'll talk a lot about that today. But first I want to turn things over, before I turn things over to Dan, I want to also reiterate that this isn't just folks who are managing or have some responsibility for managing the digital risk landscape in their organizations. This rises now to the executive suite and to the board level. And according to the new survey that has come out from the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors of public companies, only 12% of board members believe that their boards understand what the new threats are, that they have that level of knowledge to be able to properly oversee a company's management of their digital risk footprint. And only 37% feel confident that the companies on which they are boards are properly secured against these threats. So we've got a lot of work to do in the coming year, and I'm going to turn things over to Dan now to talk about some of the threats that are most important to think about as we enter 2018.
Great, thanks Jen, and thanks to everyone for attending this webinar. We're really excited, and I'll just jump in. So Proofpoint looks at a lot of data from email, web, social, across the board, and we wanted to share a little bit of our findings based on data that we've accumulated over time. And what we're seeing for 2018 is that a lot of the same threats are kind of amping up, and we'll talk through some of these. So the first one is something called angler phishing, and that's really where your customer support accounts on social are being taken advantage of to lure customers into clicking on things or disclosing information that they really shouldn't be doing. So, one of the reasons why it is becoming more and more of a problem is it works, right? People ask for help, and they get what they think is help, and so they're more inclined to click on or respond in a way that they don't normally do if they just receive an email. And so when you look at the data, we've seen a 70% increase just from April to June, and a 200% increase in fake customer support accounts. So if you think about it, creating a fake account is pretty easy to do. It doesn't take much effort to steal a logo and use a similar name to create a Twitter account or a Facebook page or anything else. And so the bar is set really low for scammers to try to create lookalike sites that they're going to use to reach out to your customers. So one example of this, you can just see there's a user here saying, every time I'm on the website, it's not working, I'm super frustrated, and they make a mention to the bank, right? Because they're hoping that the bank is actually going to reply to them. Instead, what happens is a fake account replies first and says, oh, hey, we're really sorry, we sincerely apologize, log into your account and use this link, right? Because this user just asked for help, her defenses are lowered, she's expecting someone to reply, and here comes this account that kind of looks like her bank and says, click this link. So of course she does, and when she does, she gets sent over to basically an exact replica of what her bank would look like, except in this version, there's probably 7 or 8 pages that she clicks through where they will just ask basically as many questions that you're willing to answer. And then at the end of it, they'll say, thank you, we're resolving your problem, and then they kick you out to the legitimate page. And most people kind of never even know what's been happening. So it's really kind of an insidious problem. We're seeing it kind of everywhere. Somebody has either credentials or something that can be stolen. And so we just anticipate that that is going to continue to expand. The other thing that we're seeing a lot is domain fraud. So it used to be the case that people would try to hack into a website, they try to plant something, and it's not easy to do. More websites are getting secured, and what the bad guys have figured out is, you know what, I don't really actually need to hack into the website, the legitimate website. I can just create one that's kind of close enough, or I can just use a domain name and I can start sending out email or links, and I'll get to the people the same way. And so as a result, we've seen kind of the number of hacked sites drop, but we've seen this like giant increase in suspicious or fake domains that are getting created. And again, if you look at almost any company, you'll see there are a number of domains that are being created that are fake. Sometimes it'll be off by one letter or one character. They're starting to use internationalized domains that resolve kind of in the browser to look like the domain they're trying to impersonate, but maybe instead of an A, they're using a different character that kind of looks like an A. This is also problematic because more and more people are using kind of non-PC devices, right? They're using tablets, they're using their phones, and so these domains either aren't even shown, or when they resolve, they're so small that it's really hard to tell the difference between the real site and the fake site. And so as a result, we're seeing this giant increase in these lookalike domain attacks. Here's an example of a simple example of one. This is kind of a fake bank site, and if you look, you can kind of see it's not the legitimate bank at all, right? But again, people don't necessarily notice. They either can't see it because they're on a mobile device, or someone that they kind of believe is sending them to the right place has given them this link. And again, when they click on this link, they get taken to a page that looks just like the link that they would expect, or the page that they would expect to see. The problem is they're really just going to end up getting phished, and this continues to be a problem. And as I said, we're seeing this increase. We don't expect to see it decrease anytime soon. So on the compliance side, mostly we've been talking about kind of security and people, customers getting scammed. But internally, if you're part of a company or a firm that has compliance or kind of regulatory concerns, you've got a whole different set of problems, right? And this is something else that we're starting to see, mostly because agents and advisors and brokers and everybody basically has figured out that they can do some kind of good, legitimate business online, right? They can reach out to their customers, they can look for various life events, and they can build up their business if they have kind of a prolific social profile. The problem is those profiles and those accounts are regulated just like email and just like anything else. And this poses a particular problem, for example, if you're trying to get a bunch of advisors on social, because you need to retain every single tweet, right? You need to know what is on that link that someone is sending out. You need to verify that any change they make on their social profile is actually approved. I mean, how do you do that, right? At scale, we're seeing on average 1,000 different profile changes every year from customers who are using this, right? Because these individual users want to update their profiles, they want to make changes, and when each one of those has to be verified and vetted, it can be painful at least, right? Worst case is you're going to need a bunch of staff to go and kind of monitor all this, or even worse, I guess, you end up getting audited, and the regulators have a problem with the way you've been running your program. And to multiply that by the number of people, each individual person is sort of getting set up with more and more social media accounts. So now you don't just have 50 or 100 or 500 agents or advisors or 10,000. You have 10,000 times 3, right? Because they're all maintaining and being active on multiple social profiles. Yeah, and again, this is just an example of kind of the account sprawl that you'll see. And there's really 2 issues with this. One, these accounts can get set up. Nobody has to ask. And so unless an agent or an advisor is forthcoming and they disclose, you basically don't know where these are. You don't know how many of them they might have. And, again, back to the kind of fraudulent account scenario, there's really not a lot to stop someone from creating a bogus version of you as a user on one of these social accounts. I mean, if you think about someone creating a fake LinkedIn profile and reaching out to people it's very difficult to tell the difference between your legitimate LinkedIn profile and a profile that was created and basically just copies the one that you have. So beyond social, when we talk to people who are looking for other things related to digital risk, we talked to Forrester, and they did their own survey, and this kind of mirrors what we're seeing from our customers as well. They're not just worried about their social accounts, but they're also worried about making sure that their C-level and kind of high-profile employees are also getting protected, not just their own accounts, but they want to make sure that if there is any chatter going on or there are any threats on these social platforms, that they're being made aware of them, because this is happening more and more. You've probably seen in the news that people either get outright threatened or someone will dox them, which means they'll find personal information about them and they'll get on social and release someone's private phone number or their private email address or their home address, where they live. All of those things are very concerning to people. But about a quarter of the companies that Forrester talked to have adopted some technology to help improve with what we call dark web investigations, right? Basically trying to find things that are online that are not easily indexed by Google, right? So it's one thing to just Google your name and see what shows up. There's a lot of other sites that they don't lend themselves easily to being indexed by a search site like Bing or Google, and so you need alternative methods to find chatter that might be happening on those sites. And then there's actual physical risks. It's not just a risk to a person, but it's a risk to the building that you're in. It's they want to know about activities that are occurring near your building. So it's kind of the combination of making sure that they're helping to protect their people, but also they're being made aware of things that are happening in locations that are important to them. And just by way of example, this is one that I think should be familiar to lots of people. There was this sort of attempted bombing in New York City. This is exactly the kind of thing that you'd want to know, right? If you are a firm and this is happening within a few blocks of your location, you might want to know, right? And so we have customers who say, if there is a traffic jam, we want to know. If there's a protest going on in the street, even if it's not protesting us, like if it's about us, of course we want to know. But even if it's not about us, if it's happening on the road in front of us and it's going to cause a disruption, we want to know. Is there an active shooter in the neighborhood? We want to know, right? Is there a threat being made to our executives or our people that we'd want to notify security about, physical security? We want to know. And so these things are all becoming more top of mind as they kind of both, we hear articles or mentions in the news. Everyone is just starting to think more about how this would impact them.
Thanks, Dan. So let's talk a little bit about how to prepare your organization. And one of the things that we found in our State of Digital Risk survey was that because these threats go beyond, well beyond what is typically thought of as IT security and their function, that of protecting internally owned assets such as the network infrastructure and the email programs and other types of data, there seems to be a disconnect. And sometimes IT will think, well, that's social media, and that's not even owned by us, and that's owned by marketing. And marketing is thinking that IT has it, and IT is thinking that marketing or communications has it. And meanwhile, these new kinds of threats over the last few years continue to proliferate, and hackers get more and more intelligent about how to take advantage of these kinds of gaps. And so one of the best practices that we identified, and there are organizations that do this well, is that they partner across multiple functions to make sure that there's a lot of communication, collaboration, and coordination to address all of these new types of risks, and not just relying on the IT security department to make sure that they have taken care of all of it. So Dan, you want to talk a little bit more about that and some of the things that we've seen in our work with organizations, both your customers and those that we surveyed this year?
Yeah, I think that it really depends on the organization and how large they are. I think in some cases there's really not much coordination, and in some other cases there's really good coordination. But we see the marketing team get involved, we see legal, we see governance to the extent that some companies have a function for governance. Obviously security / IT get involved. And I think the programs that work best tend to be the ones where kind of everyone is engaged and they're all on the same page. But we have had customers who have different groups who are independently rolling out solutions because those particular solutions meet their own unique needs, and it takes a while to connect the dots between all of the different stakeholders to make sure that everything is getting covered.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it took us a couple of years to put this in place at Thomson Reuters, but as my role expanded from just social media to all things digital, my team was able to coordinate our digital center of excellence. And that included strategy, oversight, and enablement. And we had representatives from marketing, from communications, from internal comms, from training and compliance, HR, and obviously security and technology governance. And at that point, and sales too, because as we were rolling out social selling across our organization, and we had 6,000 salespeople, it was really important that we were thinking comprehensively and working together to make sure that all of our policies, all of our training programs, and all of our tools and technologies were protecting us.
Hey, Jen, a quick question about that. So what's the dynamic that you've experienced? Is it that sales and marketing are really pushing to implement these programs, and the kind of the rest of the business feels like they need to figure out how to enable or allow that technology? Or do you still see these other organizations kind of pushing back and saying, yeah, that's interesting, we know you want to do that, but we're just never going to allow you to do it?
Well, it depends. Sometimes actually having the conversation with security or compliance is the best case scenario. Sometimes organizations will be starting, or individuals within organizations will be starting to take on some of these practices, whether it's social selling or employee advocacy, and they're happening, and it's not even on the radar of those who have to think about IT security or compliance or management or monitoring. And so the best case is that there's that conversation that happens between sales and marketing and IT or anyone else who has to think about managing digital risk, whether that's from a brand perspective, compliance perspective, or truly a hacking or incident perspective. But those conversations don't always happen, and so sometimes you're running to catch up with yourselves, or in the worst case scenario, an incident occurs, and then things have to get fixed after the fact. So I would encourage anyone on the call today to make sure that if they are thinking about starting a program, that they are really proactively talking to all the potential stakeholders, and we'll talk more about that in terms of some of our other best practices before you launch anything. So I'd like to do a quick poll now, and Erin, if you can bring that up, we'd love to hear from you. How, given all of these threats that Dan talked about, and also the conversation we just had, how prepared is your team for a social media hack? Extremely prepared, as in you have a plan and you run test scenarios, which is something we did when we were at Thomson Reuters. Somewhat prepared, you have a plan and you know who to contact if something were to happen, or you don't feel that your organization is prepared. We'll give you a few seconds. Okay, and we'll close the poll down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we've got some of you who are extremely prepared, and that's fantastic. When it's Q&A time, we also look for best practices. So if you want to share a success, that's great too. Somewhat prepared, 42%. And unfortunately, the majority, more than half of you, don't feel like you're at all prepared. And obviously that reflects the findings that we had in our survey as well. So it's not surprising, but we certainly hope that today's webinar will help you know what steps to take as you enter the new year. Thank you very much for taking part in that. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to avoid a social media attack. So first of all, as we just started to talk about in the conversation between Dan and I, think comprehensively. Make sure that your employee social media policy is addressing both branded as well as employee accounts, because increasingly that's where new kinds of hackings are happening. And make sure that you have training and that it is a priority, because many organizations have social media policies, but sometimes employees don't even know that they exist. And in addition to the do's and don'ts of how to conduct yourself on social media, it's really important now that you are talking about securing those accounts, whether that's a branded account or an employee account. Particularly as organizations are now also encouraging their executives to use social media, those are a big target. And so thinking about password best practices, two-factor authentication, and the new kinds of tools and technologies that can be used to protect those accounts. And make it part of the employee onboarding process so that right from the start, your employees know that there is a proper way to make sure that their use of social media is compliant and safe. Also, make sure that you're monitoring social media. So, if something happens and your customers are out there using Twitter or using Facebook or whatever social media platforms they use to talk about the fact that your brand just got hacked and they went to an imposter site, you want to know about that as soon as possible. So the best way to know about that probably is by monitoring your social media accounts all the time, and to know if your own accounts are getting hacked, not just imposter accounts getting set up and fooling your customers, but if your own accounts are getting hacked, you're going to see that if you are proactively monitoring all the time, and not just assuming that your agency is monitoring your accounts or just the comms team is monitoring your accounts, but if you are responsible for managing social media in any capacity, you need to be also monitoring those accounts. And then finally, partner with a vendor. As I said in the very opening, we have a lot of organizations in the survey that we ran that were not using any kind of tool or technology to proactively protect their social media accounts against potential hacks. So those are some best practices. Make sure you have a clearly defined plan and specific roles and workflows in place. Run those scenarios, as we talked about, in the most optimized organizations just as you would with any other crisis communications plan. You have to plan ahead. You have to understand what a scenario might look like and what everyone's responsibility is, and make sure those are all clearly communicated to the key stakeholders across the organization. And those, yeah.
Sorry, Jen, can I mention one thing too? I'd also say don't underestimate who those key stakeholders are. We've seen lots of cases where someone might have a plan, but they think, well, not everybody knows or cares about our Twitter account, and something goes wrong, and they end up getting the CMO or the CEO asking questions like, why did this happen? Whereas then all of a sudden they're scrambling because they didn't even think this was on the radar screen of kind of the C-level executives, when in fact it was. And so you should really think about, when you are going to have that communication, who are you going to include? And you need to make sure you're prepared to answer any questions that anybody at any level might have.
Absolutely. And sometimes that Twitter account isn't on the radar of the CEO until something happens. And that's not how you want to get the attention of the CEO if you're on the social media team. So that, to your point, that effective partnership includes not just the social media team, but also the internal communications team. Particularly if you're starting to use a lot of employee social media, partner with them to make sure that they are helping you with training and enablement and employee communications. The marketing and communications teams, external communications teams, PR, corporate affairs. If your social media accounts get hacked, you're going to need them, and you need to have a plan in place well before that happens. And then obviously, the Office of the CIO, the CISO, and any other folks that you have responsible for managing digital or social media risk. So sometimes there's a data protection and privacy organization. This may be members of your legal team. We certainly had them as part of our Digital Center of Excellence, and they were very close partners. And as we enter the age of GDPR next spring, it's going to be really important, too, that we think about things like where data is getting collected and how it's getting managed. And increasingly, organizations are collecting data through their social media activities as part of that channel. So making sure you're partnering with them as well, because threats are coming internally as well as externally. And usually it's just because of a lack of communication or knowledge. And obviously HR management, especially in the case of employee social media, and often because HR management is in charge of compliance and training for employees. So that gives you a really comprehensive set of folks, and hopefully if you are partnering with them, if you create some kind of oversight committee or center of excellence, then you are coming at this from so many perspectives that you'll be thinking about things very comprehensively. Also, make sure that you are well prepared to immediately contact the social media presence point that may be the source of the hacking. So we have included some links here that hopefully you're familiar with. You do need to file a ticket with each of these, but also increasingly, as organizations are using paid social media, make sure you're using your account representative too. Ask them in advance, at account planning time, what steps they recommend and what scenarios they have in place, and how they would like you to work with them in case something happens. And make sure that you are working with them if something does happen, that they are able to delete those unauthorized posts and temporarily disable the account. Now, we're going to talk about how you can do that through internally owned tools later on in the webinar, but this is kind of that backup, and it's kind of the lowest form of protection that you should take, is making sure that you know who to contact at those social media networks that you can deal with directly as well.
Yeah,
so we're going to do, yeah.
Sorry, just before we do the poll, I just want to emphasize that point. If you have any kind of ad spend on these platforms, your sales rep, it's a bit counterintuitive, but that sales rep is going to be your best friend. You certainly need to do what Jen described, but as she had in that bullet, that salesperson is going to be able to walk down the hall or pick up the phone and make sure that your request is getting expedited. So for sure, everyone should know who that is and how to contact that person, because they'll be very effective in helping you if you have an issue.
Yep. So to those on the call today, do you have a comprehensive social media crisis plan that involves all the necessary key stakeholders internally and externally? And we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, it went away already. No, and that's not surprising at all. And again, we hope that today's webinar will help you to put that in place. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call your Chief Information Security Officer. I took mine out to lunch the first week that he joined our company, and we worked very closely together, his office and my team, because we were using social media in a new and wide variety of ways, and I felt, quite frankly, that it was job protection for me to be sure that that was not flying under the radar of our IT security team. And many of you probably are part of a communications organization or a marketing organization. Make sure you're reaching out to the other side, as well as your sales organization. And those conversations are incredibly valuable. I can't emphasize it enough. It is the foundation of protecting yourself against this new digital and social media risk landscape that we all face today. So with that, I'm going to just take another moment to visit our State of Digital Risk survey results. One thing that really surprised us was when we asked these over 200 companies that ranged in size from small businesses but up through multinational, multi-billion-dollar, tens of thousands employee companies. Do you use vendors to manage your digital risk, tools and vendors? And only half of them said yes. And even less said yes when we asked them about using specific tools, vendors, technologies to help protect against specific social media, brand, security, and compliance risks. Only a third used any kind of tools or technologies. But these solutions have existed for several years now, and they continue to improve, and really, I can't tell you how much better I slept at night when I was leading social media at Thomson Reuters once we had these solutions in place. So I'm going to turn things over to Dan again to talk a little bit about some of these solutions that exist.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so it should come as no surprise to you that part of what Proofpoint does is exactly this, right? Our digital risk solutions help to protect you from all the kinds of things that we've been talking about. So we're looking for evidence of account hacks or takeovers. Sometimes it's just defacement. Sometimes they're going to use accounts for other things. We can help you monitor social content. Maybe it's spam, it's profanity, it's hate, it's malware. The busier your page is, the more of a target you become, right? Because it's a lot easier now for someone to post on your Facebook page than to send out 1 million email messages, 99% of them which never get seen or opened. On the compliance side, again, for all the reasons I described, it is hard to scale a program when you need to monitor virtually everything that agents and advisors and representatives are doing. It's just hard to do. And then we've been talking a lot about these fake accounts and how easy they are, and how how many of them we end up seeing. This is something that we're able to help you do. We can help you search for these accounts. We can build an inventory for you, and then we can even help you take them down. In terms of product, again, I won't spend too much time on this, but the product called Social Patrol, again, is going to monitor your account. We basically fingerprint all the attributes. If we see any changes, we can give you kind of real-time notification. You can set up policies that are flexible. You can create your own rules. We've got about 130 built-in rules for, again, things like hate and compliance and profanity. We even can take kind of automated action. So if you want to delete comments that are hateful or malicious, instead of having to have people moderate, we can do this for you in real time, 24/7. And again, that includes all the compliance reviews. both the accounts, the profiles. We can help you retain all of this data that's required by the various regulatory agencies. And we can even do kind of generic searches too. So not just protecting your brand accounts or your key executive or people accounts, but we can even go out and search for people who are talking about you or trying to, hijack your hashtags, things like that. And it's all kind of built in together. We can have individual notifications that go out. We can have workflow, et cetera, et cetera. So we make it really easy for you to do. And again, I sort of just mentioned this, but in terms of kind of knowing that there's an indication that your account's been hacked, if you have a logo and suddenly it changes into a skull and crossbones or a naked picture, that's pretty much a good guarantee. And so we give you the ability to easily kind of lock down your account. If you say, yeah, I didn't make this change, we can revert those changes, put the text or the image back, and then again, obviously, once you have advanced notification, while we're removing anything that might be dangerous from that account, you can put your program into place and call the right people and make sure everyone's notified, and again, exercise that action plan that you have for making sure you get that account back and that everybody's made aware.
So we're going to do one more quick poll, and then we're going to move on to some questions. How would you be alerted? And there's only 2 of the 4 selections there. So we do have 4 selections. I'm not sure how to handle that. What we wanted to ask you was, how would you be alerted if one of your social media accounts was compromised, and either you manually... Sorry? There's 4? Oh, I can only see 2. Well, I apologize then. I manually monitor the account, would see it. Someone in my organization would alert me. The 3rd one, I don't remember, and the 4th one is that you wouldn't know.
One is I would get an alert from my vendor's tool, which monitors, and the 4th is I wouldn't know.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I don't know why I can't see the other 2. So we'll give you a minute for that. And we're going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. I can see all 4 responses, though. So we do have almost half of you who are monitoring the accounts, so that's good. And that someone in your account would alert you. Hopefully they're monitoring the account. It's great that we have some folks who are using some of these tools and technologies, so 12%, but almost a quarter of you wouldn't know. And so, again, we hope that is today's tips have been helpful to you so that you can improve your risk management processes and the tools and technologies that you use to protect your accounts in the coming year. And so as we go into Q&A, we just want to leave you with some key recommendations to prepare yourselves for the coming year. So make sure that you're reviewing your existing digital and social media risk management policies. Bring them all together, right? Because your technology governance organization probably has some policies. Your communications team probably manages, or maybe your legal team manages the social media policy. Maybe compliance manages the training. Make sure that those are all comprehensive to address all the threats we talked about today, that they're all up to date, that they're all compliant with regulations, and that there is a comprehensive approach and that everyone knows what they're doing, what their role is with maintaining those and communicating those to employees. Take the lead and collaborate and communicate across those departments and functions that we talked about today, and make sure that you are developing comprehensive employee communications, training, and enablement programs to really help your employees understand the best practices that they can undertake to help manage their own use of employee social media, but that they can also be the eyes and ears for you if something bad happens. You know, we talked a little bit about employee advocacy programs earlier, And they can be your best assets, your employee advocates, but they have to be brought into the loop early. So as part of your employee advocacy program and your training to those advocates, you should include something about, hey, if we get hacked or if we have a crisis, here's your role, and here's how we're going to communicate to you in real time how to help us address this crisis, this social media hack or this fake website that is, or this breach that has stolen our customers' data. Your employee advocates are your most trusted communication sources, and I think those of you in comms know this. So use them in those moments to help communicate out to all of your external customers and stakeholders that, you know, what to do next, or what the status of the crisis is, and that can be for really any kind of crisis. But think about how to use those employee advocates to your advantage. And then finally, I can't emphasize this enough. I'll tell you that I truly, truly slept better at night once I deployed these tools and technologies that Dan just reviewed to proactively identify and manage the threats coming from social media as well as email and mobile. Unfortunately for me, it came post-hack. And so when we had a hack, it was suddenly very easy to get my business case approved for those new tools and technologies. We have developed some resources for you in our resource center that will allow you to educate yourself around the things we've talked about today, but there's also a resource on how to develop a business case to get more resources, whether those are human resources and or tools and technologies to help you better address the threats that we face today. So we hope that all of those things are helpful to you. And with that, we will take some questions. Aaron, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have lots of questions flooding in, but please do send more if you have any questions after that. And first of all, thanks a lot, Jen and Dan. I think every time I listen to a presentation about digital risk and social media, I'm always absolutely terrified at some of the examples people have. But it's inspiring to see that you've, I guess, got solutions for that, and kind of hopefully, you know, people won't be waiting now until they get hacked to have that business case. People will be going now and speaking to their teams and getting this sorted for the new year. But I guess kind of the first couple of questions that came through slightly earlier in the presentation were around who to report this to. The first question was from Randy, and he was asking, if you see a fake site, what's the kind of the process for reporting it? Who's the kind of your first port of call to go to?
Yes, I'll jump in and I'll answer that. So Jen did touch on this. You know, if you've got an account rep, that's obviously the first place to go to. The links that were in the presentation are kind of the next best thing. I will tell you that if you're going to report, you need to sort of be aware of what kinds of accounts are going to get taken down, and you have to be prepared for the right kind of information. So if it's let's say it's a Twitter account or a Facebook page, both of them allow you to report, but if it is a parody account, if it is a protest account, you know, I hate Finco Financial, they're likely not going to take it down. They're going to take it down if it looks like it's impersonating you. They'll take it down. And one way to help them ensure that they take it down is to be ready with your copyright information or trademark information. They have a duty to actually react in a very short amount of time under the DCMA or Digital Copyright DMCA. And so if you're ready with your kind of copyright documents, you'll find good success. But I'll also warn you that a lot of them will send you down this sort of tree that at lots of points they try to get you to say, reach out to the account owner and ask them politely to stop doing what they're doing, right? Which in this world is just never going to happen. But they try very hard to not get to the point where they're going to kind of agree to take down the account. But it certainly can be done.
Okay, great. And obviously we'll be sending around the recording so people can go back and look at those links. I guess kind of to add to that question, would that be different if it's a web domain or a website? Who's kind of the port of call there?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I think depending on your business, if you have a group of people, usually in legal, who know how to do this, and you do this as part of a practice, then you can just simply forward those domains to them. But if this isn't something that you do, you can look up the information, you can find who the registrar is, you can reach out to the registrar and put in a claim. Again, it's going to be similar. You have to say that they're sort of misrepresenting you. And again, there are lots of vendors, including Proofpoint, but there are other vendors too, who do this kind of every day. And so they know who to reach out to, and they have relationships, and they can help to get these taken down quickly.
Okay.
And I think it's really important that companies are more proactive in their disclosure about when something happens, whether it's their fault or not. Too often we've seen companies that would rather hide from the fact that there was either some sort of breach of their own accounts or even not taking responsibility when others are spoofing their accounts. And it would be a wonderful service to customers if even if they saw something that went up that is an imposter site that they had nothing to do with and could not have protected themselves against really, except to have it maybe be on their radar faster if they were using some of the tools and technologies that Dan talked about, but be proactively using social media and using their communications channels to warn their customers that this is happening while they're trying to get it taken down. And I think that doesn't happen often enough, and when you have that kind of comprehensive partnership and collaboration between departments, and you have planned for this through scenario planning, then the PR team, whoever's managing social accounts and whoever's managing more traditional types of external communications, could be a lot more effective in protecting customers against falling for that if they can talk about the fact that it's happening and how to avoid it.
Okay, great. And we've just had, I guess, come through from Deb Haynes, and she's recommending for anyone to go check out copyright.gov and their directory there, where you can get some more information on kind of takedowns. But I guess bringing it back to social media, one of the questions we had, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but from Mr. Crutchfield, is how do you do you have any examples that you can share, specifically, I guess, from Proofpoint, where you've worked to kind of take down a fake social media account or avoid a hack? He's looking for some, I guess, I'm not sure if you're able to share due to privacy, but if there's any examples that you can share of maybe types of companies you've worked with and what took place.
I probably don't want to use particular companies, but we do manage takedowns ourselves. We've kind of got a process for doing it. I will say that some organizations just have a need to do this internally. One of our customers they have a person full-time who does takedowns. I think in 2016, at least, I don't know if they've done so far, but in 2016 they took down 5,000 accounts. They're a kind of a gaming company, and so people are always trying to scam their end users. We have a practice for taking down domains as well. Again, for social, it's straightforward because you know exactly who to reach out to on the platform. Domains, you have to find the right registrar, things like that. But it's all doable. Again, it is difficult if it's just not a clear-cut case of someone who is trying to defraud or impersonate you. If you just don't like them, it's going to be much more difficult to get them taken down. But we do the same thing on social accounts as well. We've got customers who are continually getting they're victims of various protests, and so protesters will sort of create these chat rooms and have these virtual mobs that will attack their Facebook page or their YouTube account and just try to pummel the account with thousands and thousands of cut and paste comments. And so, we track those. We generate alerts when we see anomalous activity, and we can automatically hide or delete those comments.
Okay, great. And I guess another question coming in from June. Well, I guess a response. She says, thank you for the excellent webinar, and I guess thank you, June, for listening in. She wants to give an example of her local church that she attends. Their PayPal account was hacked earlier this year due to someone having their Google login and it kind of being similar passwords across both. They also got onto their GoDaddy and their Weebly account. So they were able to take over $1,000 from the church. So I guess that's a real good example there of how if one person gets into one account, they can get into multiple different ones. Do you have any, I guess, advice there? Is it a case of having kind of different passwords for different accounts, controlling, who has access? What would you kind of recommend in those situations where you have multiple accounts? Once one account is hacked, do you kind of then change the password for all the rest? What kind of, I guess, tips would you give there?
Yeah, I mean that's probably a topic for a whole different webinar. But I will say that if you're using platforms that allow for multiple users, so Facebook has something called Facebook Business Manager, where you can kind of assign permissions to various people. LinkedIn does the same thing. Those are great because everyone has accountability, and you can have different permissions for different people. But for Twitter, for example, if you have 10 people sharing a Twitter account, any one of those 10 could get phished and compromise that password, right? You don't really know who does it. So one of the things our customers do is they basically vault the passwords such that the password vault will fill in the username and password for the user. That user doesn't actually know who the password, what the password is, so they can't really get compromised. And certainly not having the same password across accounts. Absolutely, you should not be doing that.
Well, and even just posting natively is a risk, and so I would highly recommend, maybe for a church, I understand with our church we would never invest probably in a social media management platform, but we just wouldn't have the budget. But for most organizations, there are social media management platforms that will help you to manage your posts, and in the case of using a platform like that in conjunction with the Proofpoint solutions that Dan has talked about, there is a setting that if a post is coming not from your account, not from that social media platform, but a hacker, for example, is trying to post something natively to your Twitter account or your Facebook account or LinkedIn, whatever, that it will not allow that to happen. Your post will only be approved through that Proofpoint monitoring if they are coming through that approved account of your social media management platform. And that's a huge protection.
Okay, we're running kind of low on time, but I'm going to try and sneak in one last question. And I guess it's kind of a two-part question from Joseph Sheba, who's submitted it. And he's looking for best practices to adopt, create and monitor an employee advocate program. And I guess the second part of that question is he's worried about his upper management as they won't approve policies due to high risk. So maybe if there's some tips there for working with the C-suite and upper management as well. So that's best practices to adopt, create and monitor an employee advocate program. And the second part is, I guess, kind of any tips for working with the C-suite and upper management.
Yeah, absolutely. So our firm also has done 2 years, actually, of an employee advocacy study, which includes best practices. And there are lots and lots of companies that are doing this. We've seen huge growth in employee advocacy program adoption over just the past year, and we anticipate even bigger growth in the coming year. And we are seeing that across multiple industries, including highly regulated industries like financial services and healthcare, and that was a change that we saw this year. So one of the ways that is most effective to convince the C-suite or whomever you need to convince that the benefits far outweigh the risks is looking at some of the companies that are doing this, which include Visa and FedEx, and which FedEx is a pretty risk-averse organization, but they have a very, very good program. HP and Adobe, and I can't tell you how many companies. There's thousands of companies that have really great programs out there. And one thing that is very meaningful to the C-suite, although it's interesting because mature organizations in social media don't find this that interesting a metric, but the C-suite really does, is trying to correlate the advertising value, the free advertising value that you get out of an employee advocacy program versus if you had to spend money to get that message out through paid advertising. And a lot of the platforms that you can use to manage your employee advocacy programs will do that calculation for you. What the common rule of thumb is that for 1,000 active employee advocates, you can generate about $2 million in advertising value. So that's one thing that is very helpful in a business case. If you, whoever asked that question, if you want to contact me, I can point you in the direction of the resources, both around our study and a seminar we did earlier this year with 5 companies that shared all their best practices around their programs, which included Adobe, Thomson Reuters, FedEx, Cancer Treatment Centers of America, so highly regulated healthcare industry, and another company I can't remember right now. But yeah, that's an area that if companies aren't thinking about employee advocacy, they're probably going to be left behind a little bit, because we know that employee social media is even more trusted and more paid attention to now than the branded social media. And organic social media really doesn't do much of anything anymore. There's just too much noise to cut through. So one of our advisory board members just the other day on our Proofpoint advisory board said, we're really only focusing on paid or employee. Those are the 2 forms of social media that are the most meaningful to us. And employee is certainly cheaper and has the added benefit of additional employee engagement internally. So highly recommend you to continue to beat that drum in your organization.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I know we're going a little bit over time now. Dan, was there anything you'd like to end to that before we wrap up?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, no, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Jen. It's been a great presentation, and yeah, I've certainly kind of made lots of notes. And I guess one thing to say again is the recordings are going to be available, and we'll be sending them out in the next week or so. So please do look out for those in your inbox for people to listen back to and share with your colleagues. I hope it hasn't been too scary hearing about all these risks, but there is time to get ahead of them. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks again to our presenters for presenting. And yeah, I'll see you for the next Insight Group webinar soon.